We have a new interview with Mr. Steve Danuser. Cassial came in yesterday while we were playing Mass Effect and was really devastated by the fact that we weren't watching the interview, but, we were playing Mass Effect instead. I decided that today will be the day for us to actually listen to the interview with Steve Danuser.
All right, so I myself am a hirumaredx. I run a YouTube channel for World of Warcraft. We do have lore series and stuff on there. So it's really exciting to see Steve Danuser here.
Well, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me, and looking forward to chatting with you.
Heck yeah. So, we have a limited amount of time. Should we go into the questions now?
Absolutely.
Okay, so the first one we have over here.
Again, just want to start, because he just said we have limited time. I love the fact that Blizzard is engaging with the community a lot more, like so much more than what they used to in the past. I just wish now that they would stop doing these 30-minute interviews and instead go to a proper hour and a half, 2-hour discussion. Not an interview, a discussion. Because I want to hear content creators actually be able to push back on ideas and discussions that would otherwise just be answered, like asked and answered.
Here is this is kind of a Shadowlands question. So at the end, the jailer is talking about his death and what is to come, when he was dying and stuff. At the end of the raid, is it possible that we're going to see some more about in Dragonflight, or is that something like far off in the future?
Well, yeah. So when you think about the jailer and what he was talking about, he talks about how the full context is a cosmos divided cannot stand against what is to come.
Yeah. And
so clearly he had something in mind that he was concerned about. And from his point of view...
To be fair, just to sort of fold this in, because a lot of people I've seen people claim that this is just an old, like the age-old trope. In this instance, this is actually very old. If you go back and you read the book Arthas, which is a very old book, by the way, Arthas, who was controlled by the jailer, said this. So this is a concept that they took from Arthas and they simply ported it forward. So basically keeping it canonized. Because Arthas's mindset, and by extension the jailer's mindset now, was that in order for Azeroth to survive what is to come, all of the mortal races of Azeroth needs to be undead. It needs to be united. And the way that the jailer, or Arthas in this instance, wanted to do that is by killing everyone and raising them as undead. Arthas made mention of how the mortal races constantly bicker over territory, constantly bicker over, small differences, and these bickering, sessions is going to keep them weak in the face of what is to come. So the jailer has known about some big evil that is on the way for a really long time. And obviously when I say the jailer, I mean Blizzard have thought about some big evil that's coming for a really long time. This is not a new concept. This is a concept that dates back all the way to Wrath of the Lich King.
He was the only one who could solve it. He was the only one who could stand against whatever this is. But his reference is not the first time that we've seen speculation or discussion about potential threats that are out there. If you look at some of the stuff that Fareem writes about in his journals, he has a lot of speculation about it. There was an oracle in Zereth Mortis, Sejura, who says a few lines that talk about cosmic powers and stuff.
Yeah.
And even dating back to, say, N'Zoth in around the time of BFA during 8.3 and things like that. He was talking about something coming. And
what's interesting about this is that you have cosmic threats from all of the cosmos speaking about this giant threat that's coming. We believed that the Old Gods was referring to Zuvul when they said the enemy of all. Because remember what they said? They said that the light had struck a bargain with the enemy of all. And we believed this enemy to be Zuvul. But now Zuvul is also afraid of some unknown enemy. Now, it is possible that we're just in a very weird Spider-Man meme here, where all of the cosmological forces are pointing to each other as the enemy of all, and you know, basically just, this is a nightmare, what the hell happens? It's possible, although I think there's more to it. All of the cosmological forces believe that only if they can unite the entire Great Beyond under their banner can they survive whatever great threat is to come. And again, from the Alfirim book, the Expedition lore book, Alfirim speaks about two forces at the start. One that would ultimately become our cosmos, and then the other that is on the outside. So what if this great enemy that all of the cosmological forces are referring to is this other force? The force that was left on the outside, according to the language of the first ones. And that is the thing that all of them are preparing for, because that is some all-consuming force that we have never seen in World of Warcraft.
Wanting us to be, you know, N'Zoth wasn't talking about killing us. He wasn't talking about just wiping us out. He was talking about, like, yeah, join me, come.
Oh,
and he
I
was
thought
talking.
that was just like him, like,
I said this. And people disagree with me. People say, no, that's not true. You know, N'Zoth just wanted to kill us and all enemies are constantly testing us. And say, yes, they're testing us because they want us. They need us. Thank you.
posturing. I didn't know that was actually like a threat.
No, he was. He has. If you go back through and look at things, this was seated back in there as well. So when you
boys, I think we can now confirm that the World of Warcraft lore team watches my videos. They have to, right? This is clearly. They saw that I say this. They went, man, this guy has some great ideas for the future of WoW. Let's just take this. This confirms it. As far as I'm concerned, confirmed. I am ipso facto the shadow writer of the World of Warcraft story. Thank you very much.
You have like multiple entities, you know, of different backgrounds. Obviously,
Yeah.
you know, N'Zoth is of the void, and the jailer is of death. It starts, you know, painting a pattern and of this knowledge that isn't just one person's perspective, but other entities having perspective on this too. So, you know, we try to tell these stories in places and settings where they feel most appropriate. And, you know, certainly in the Dragon Isles right now, the story that we're telling is one about the dragons and the aspects and kind of them as a people. But this thread isn't something that we've forgotten about, but it'll surface again in the right setting and as it's building towards, you know, learning more about what might be going on.
Yeah, because I just assume like most people think it's like the.
Does that kind of confirm that the primal incarnates aren't working alone? Because Steve Danuser just said there, right? It will resurface eventually once we learn more about what is actually going on. Can we take that as confirmation that the primal incarnates are not, in fact, acting of their own fruition, or at least not entirely acting within their own free will?
The Void Lords, but if N'Zoth was the one warning about it too, it's probably not that. Would you say that is probably true?
Well, you know, N'Zoth is the relationship between the old gods and the Void Lords is, you know, one that is interesting and hasn't been delved into a ton so far.
Oh, really?
But it's certainly something that should we delve into the Void again in the future, which you can probably imagine that we might be. That's something that would be interesting to explore there for sure.
Okay.
Was that another confirmation of a theory? Okay, I'm going to tell you guys what my theory is, although those of you that watch my videos all the time will know exactly what my theory is on this. But I do not believe that the old gods are of the void. Literally in one of my newest videos, I actually mentioned that as just sort of like a sentence. I don't think that the old gods are of the void. I think the old gods are of decay. from the elemental planes of decay. This is where the old gods originate, and of course that comes from Yogg-Saron infecting the waters, Galakrond drinking the infected waters, and then Galakrond becoming the primalist or the primal incarnate of decay. That's where that theory comes from, because otherwise, how did Yogg-Saron actually give or gift Galakrond the powers of decay? Yogg-Saron also refers to himself as the god of death. Now, decay, death, very closely aligned to each other. Void Lord's death, not that closely related to each other, because Void Lords means nothing, or void means nothing. It doesn't mean death. Death is a very strict concept within World of Warcraft. So, could we say that there's at least a chance that that theory might be correct?
So what you're saying is they're not just necessarily mindless minions of the Void Lords, then?
Well, no, they definitely are not. And the thing about the Void that makes it different from the other cosmic forces, when you look at like the Titans, who are the epitome of order, literally the embodiment of order as a force, they have a hierarchy and a structure, and everything is very kind of rigid and planned and laid out. And the light is similar in that regard, in that there is like a true path that the light wants to see and it believes is the one way to do things. But the nature of the void is one of possibilities. And part of believing in infinite possibilities is that you need to be open to changing your plans and evolving and adapting when a better option comes along. That's one of the strengths of the void, is its adaptability. And you could also say that like life is an adaptable sort of force as well.
Very chaotic.
You know, even fell in its own way is.
You see, in World of Warcraft, you have three cosmological forces that are heavily influenced by order, and three cosmological forces that are heavily influenced by chaos. The three chaotic ones, life, foul, and void, very chaotic. The three order ones is death, light, and order, very heavily influenced by order. So things have to be ordered, things have to be structured, which then perhaps the two original forces may have been order and chaos. Those were the original forces that eventually would become our universe. That does not describe the enemy of all, though. Although I would say what Steve Danuser just said there shot a hole in that theory. The only way I could salvage that theory would be to shift it slightly and say that the old gods were indeed creatures of decay, but they sort of started serving the Void Lords, just like, for example, the dragons started serving the Titans. So where the dragons made the choice for order, the old gods made the choice for void.
Adaptive and changing and chaotic in its nature. So it's interesting how these cosmic forces have similarities and differences that aren't always just apparent in terms of like their intent and their, you know, whether they seem benevolent or good or not. So to answer your question, beings of the void are contentious by nature and adaptable by nature. And so if N'Zoth or the Void Lords have a strategy to begin with, they're more than willing to adapt and change as a better path to success comes along.
Okay. I think I get that. That makes a lot more sense. Okay, let's go into the next one. So, we have the alternate Azeroth timeline. That's not entirely the same as Azeroth, the one where the Murloc goes back in time and makes Az-Murloth. Are we going to see any more like alternate timelines in Dragonflight?
Well, that's a bit spoilery. Certainly, we've got bronze dragons, we've got infinites, as you've seen, kind of got something going on there. So I think it's a safe bet that certainly we have some storylines planned with time and those forces.
I like time.
Az-Murloth was a special case. That's a really fun quest line, that whole series of events.
Everybody's Murlocs.
It's funny as shit.
It's super fun, super flavorful. Our quest designer, Kate Bankson, who worked on that, is awesome and did a lot of fun, had a lot of fun with that. And so, time and playing with with possibilities and possible realities, I think, is definitely part of the storyline. Well, not exactly the same as Asmerloth or doing riffs on that, but it's definitely fundamental to this guy that's on the screen behind me, and caring about time and what he perceives as inevitability.
That confirms Morazon, boys. Because there is only one thing that Nosdormu perceives as inevitable, and that is that he becomes Morazon. This is one of the conversations that he has with Chromie, where Chromie vows to do everything in her power to ensure that he does not become Morazon, and Nosdormu, sort of like a father would to a child, encourages her. But you realize that, nah, fam, that you cannot stop this. This is inevitable. I will become Morazon. And as a result of this, you will all become infinite dragons. There's no discussion. There's no denying it. This is the future. Great stuff. Take care of yourself, fam.
And what others might see as only one of many possibilities. So all that stuff yet to play out.
I get it. On a related question, I'm going to jump ahead on these because we were talking about Nosdormu. So in Dragonflight, we saw the infinite Dragonflight seems to be a lot more negotiable. In the past, they have never been, which is quite the change. Does this mean we're going to have more infinite Dragonflight lore coming up? Like in the way where we might be able to actually negotiate with them instead of only just killing them?
Again, you're touching on spoilery stuff, but yeah,
in like the most non-spoilerly way possible.
The what I would say is, like, the past stuff that we've seen with the Infinites, sometimes it's been hard to tell exactly what their end goal was, or what these different things that they were doing was leading to. Clearly they were messing with time and so forth, but it didn't always kind of fit together. And what we tried to do in their storyline in Dragonflight is they have a clear objective. They have a thing that they want to have happen. And
for those of you that don't know what they want, the Infinite Dragonflight have one goal: to make Morazon. That's it. That is their goal. And then that goal extends, once Morazon is made, to kill all other aspects until Morazon is the only aspect. That is their goal. That is their reason for existing. That is everything for the Infinite Dragonflight. And everything they do works towards this fundamental goal.
I think that as we go forward into these stories, they will get closer and closer to having events go their way, but that they are not a monolithic entity either. We were talking about, like order lords versus void and things like that, and there's a similar philosophy of that in how they look at time. Nosdormu, being empowered by the Titans, has kind of that Aman'Thul view of things where, there must be one time stream. There must be one way that things work out.
Drathmos, so the Hour of Twilight is the inevitable outflow of Morazon becoming the only aspect. So the Hour of Twilight is where all of this ends. That's the point of Morazon. It is to bring all of the timelines to an end. In order to do this, they have to kill all of the aspects, because when the aspects are dead, no one left can interfere with that goal of ultimately leading to the end of all time. I don't know why that is exactly what Morazon won. I don't think that's ever been sort of proclaimed to us. I don't think we've ever had any sort of insights into why that is their ultimate goal. Like, why would you want to end all time? But that is, at least for now, what we think Morazon wants, is the end of all time. Now, it could just be the end of all structured time. So they believe that the timelines as it exists right now has been corrupted already, and it's already been sort of laid out in a path that we cannot really deviate from. And for Morozond, the idea is that when you destroy these artificial timelines and bring an end to time, you bring an end to the artificial sort of imposed tyranny that these timelines present. But that is completely speculation on my part. We have no evidence to suggest that that is actually what they want.
Out and then play out, and you are the custodian of that. And that's always been the thing that the way he's seen things. But the infinites have that, it's in their name. There should be infinite possibilities. There should be infinite timelines. There should be infinite ways that this can play out. And so they have been much more willing to meddle with time and its implications than the bronze dragons have been, although some of them are.
That might actually confirm it. It proves me wrong on one thing, but it confirms another part of the theory. So the infinite wants infinite timelines. Now, in order to understand this, we have to look at what Aman'Thul did. Aman'Thul declared our timeline as the prime timeline, the real one, the only one that counts. Okay, and this is also the most pure timeline. It's the one timeline that they don't screw with at all. So, in a sense, what the infinite wants to get rid of is this protection on a singular timeline, being the only real timeline, and instead for all timelines to be the quote-unquote real timeline. So the infinite possibilities, and again, more freedom. This would play into the Old God roles, because the Old God's very heavily modeled after the H.P. Lovecraft Outer God mythos, the Cthulhu mythos, and again, this is all about freedom, free will, free choice, no control, basically let people do whatever the hell they want kind of approach to things.
Have shown to be pretty willing to mess with things too.
Yeah, like the Dragon Soul.
Dragon Soul and some of the things that Kairos did in terms of getting from Pandaria to but not all the time and
I guess during the trial he was still technically the bronze dragons. They okayed the look back in time board thing.
Yeah. So but these are interconnected flights like the infinites and the bronze. They obviously have a lot of common origins and things like that. So to answer your question, I think we will see some different sides of the infinites and understand that they are not a monolithic entity, and they have some adaptability within them as well.
That's interesting, because in the past they've always just kind of randomly done stuff, which made some very interesting dungeons and quests. But now it's actually fun to see them do something more than just like, we're going to mess with stuff just for the sake of it. Okay, so next question. Will we see a continuation of singular storytelling, as in no more covenant /faction /class splits of the story? Because like in Dragonflight, everybody has the same story, but like in all the previous expansions, you had to like play different things in order to get it all. Do you guys like this style, or are you going to go back to the splitting it up in future expansions?
Well, what I would say is that we try to tell the story in a way that is most befitting the kind of tale that we're telling. So, for BFA, for example, because that was all about these two factions fighting one another, it would be very difficult to tell one story that encapsulated both points of view, and so we tried to make it very different. But in Legion had the class flavor and different artifact lines and class order halls.
That makes
covenants and Shadowlands, like you mentioned. But the thing is that regardless of how many people we have working on this and the time we have to work on any expansion, like ultimately the amount of content we make is like a pie, right? And you can decide how you want to divide that pie up. But the more you divide it up, the smaller each slice is. Yeah. And there's only so much time. There's only so much, resources and a number of people and like all that sort of stuff. And so every time we make a choice to tell lots of different stories, which was really cool with like Legion and the artifacts and stuff like that, but it has a cost to it in terms of the overall quantity that any one player, unless again they play all the variations.
Just want to highlight. We've been saying this for a long time. I said this, almost every content creator said this. If all of the Covenant stories were available to all players on a singular character, Shadowlands would instantly have had a shit ton more content than what it ended up having, just from a story perspective, and the story would also probably have received a lot more praise. Dividing your story can have some really cool things happen to it, but rarely will it work out every single time. So I like the fact that Blizzard is sort of taking this on board and saying, look, maybe in future we'll have stories that is unique to certain things, but we're definitely not gonna go back into the, two factions, completely different stories, or 4 different covenants, completely different stories, because it does limit the amount of overall content that people get, unless of course they're willing to roll alts in order to get all of the story. Second Act, by the way, 13 months, part of the DJ Nation. Appreciate you, fam. Thank you. And keep your questions and stuff to the end, guys, because I would love to answer them, but it's going to be very difficult to answer questions and watch the interview. And I don't want this interview reaction to be 4 hours long.
Unless
it's
they
good to see. So, with Dragonflight, it was really nice because this was a great opportunity to tell a very unified, singular story. This wasn't about dividing into factions or even not as elaborate as covenants. We still want everybody to be able to play everything, and Alliance and Horde weren't at each other's throats. So while we have some different quest text and things like that, based on what faction you are or who you're talking to sometimes, we didn't have to write whole swaths of content that was distinctive. And so that ends up being everybody gets the whole pie in Dragonflight, which is really cool. But, I won't say that we won't ever, if the story is fitting of having certain paths or certain pieces, we might divide the pie up again. But it's a conscious choice that we make, and we know some of the benefits and the costs to doing so.
I gotcha. Because in the Southern Barrens, for example, in Cataclysm, you get 2 completely different stories depending if you're Alliance or Horde. You go through that. Mm-hmm. And that was way before all these splits and stuff.
Yeah, and so yeah, it's excuse me, it's definitely been done before, and it's in both large and small ways and things like that. But every time we do it, it does incur a cost to the overall pie that is getting divided.
I would argue, keep the fundamental story singular, but you can have small moments where you tell 2 different stories. That's perfectly fine. A single storyline that plays out differently depending on whether you're a warlock or a mage. That's perfectly fine. It's a singular storyline. It's about 15 minutes of the overall questing experience. No problemo. But this expansion-wide, divide the expansion into multiple parts that no one is going to be able to see unless they choose that part. I think the downsides there are just too high. There's so many downsides and not enough upside, in my opinion at least. Unless, of course, you want to bring back something like the class order rolls. Because the class order rolls were perfect for these smaller stories that only had to do with the classes and really had very little to do with the overall story, other than provide flavor for what your class is doing to the overall story. So you want to bring back something like that, that could work, but yeah, Shadowlands was them going a little bit too far, I think, into this factional storytelling. And I like the fact that we're not doing that again.
We just try to be mindful of that.
Yeah, because I remember in Dragonflight, I was hearing from some people, they were like, wow, there's so many more touching story moments in Dragonflight than other expansions. And I was like, not really. It's just, since you're all seeing it all at once, you're just finally getting to see it all at, whatchamacallit. It's not split off, because I've already done all the stories and all the past expansions. It's about the same as it's always been. It's just in this one.
Yeah, but not quite. It is more, because just because a story exists doesn't mean that you saw it, right? And that makes it more. Because in Shadowlands, you cannot count the emotional stories of Shadowlands, and I don't think Hero is doing this. I just mean, you can't count all of the emotional stories in Shadowlands and all of the emotional stories in Dragonflight as I see. It's exactly the same amount. No, it isn't. Because for a player that doesn't have a lot of alts, there really was almost no emotional stories in Shadowlands, maybe 1 or 2, versus obviously in Dragonflight, there's a few, quite a few, and probably more coming even.
One, you get to see everything instead of having to make multiple alts for it.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that, and I think because you are seeing the whole picture, it does give you a broader thing and make you think there are more of this or more of that or and so forth. But the numerical quantities are probably not all that much different. But you do just get to see the whole thing at once.
Yeah, it definitely feels like it is.
Yeah.
Okay, so next question. Do you remember Margrave Crexus from Shadowlands? He was in a whole bunch of promotional material. He was in the cinematics and the loading screen. Were there any like larger storylines planned for him, or that was possibly scrapped that you might be able to talk about, or is that always just misdirection?
Well, it was neither. It wasn't either misdirection or scrapped ideas, really. Like the reality is that these expansions get developed over long periods of time, and cinematics and other supporting materials start even earlier in the process. Yeah. And so for example, we knew the zones, we knew that there were most of these figures, but like when it came to, say, the loading screen, we knew we weren't introducing the Primus until later in the expansion. And when we did, we would be showing Primus who had been changed by his captivity. He didn't look the same as he did in this kind of idealized sort of shot. Yeah. And so our choices were, well, we will have a statue of the Primus in the order hall, but you won't actually see the Primus until, the next patch in. And so we can't put, is either put a statue or put some other representation of Maldraxxus on the loading screen. And Margrave Crexus was a cool, character and model and things like that. And so the decision was made to put him in there as like, well, clearly he looks like Maldraxxus, so people will get it. And he is a powerful figure. Of course, he was not a long-lived character. Which, and it would have been cool to have him around longer because he had kind of a cool backstory and a cool relationship with Draka and things like that, that you got to see in the animatic that was released. But it wasn't any kind of like, oh, we'll trick, we want to imply that there's a bigger storyline with him. No, that was basically, he served the purpose that he was intended to serve. As kind of the embodiment of, here's the ideal of Maldraxxus and what it's supposed to be, and it's getting killed off by these dark forces that are conspiring to change Maldraxxus and how it's worked. So he kind of embodied that. And then Draka picked up the torch from him and Draka's allies and the player helping to restore, the Covenant Hall and so forth. Crexus served the purpose that he was intended to.
Yeah, that's a lot more information than I would have thought about that. It's like, I just assumed, hey, he's just a stand-in because he represents the zone well. I didn't think he was actually like that more well thought out.
Yeah, we live a long time with these characters before, they end up in whatever media or the game or whatever. And so, there's a lot of thought and care and dedication. I wish they would stop with this other media bullshit, these things. And so,
yeah, that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so next one. There's this red dragon sleeping in the caverns of Silphus called Andrastras, who's been there since Pandaria, and we've yet to have any true answers as to their purpose. And in fact, there's like a Shadowlands Anima Orb toy which randomly teleports you there. So is there going to be anything... Do we know anything about this dragon? Because like the community's been wondering about it for a long time. We just assumed it's like an Easter egg, but can you like shed any light on the sleeping dragon?
I didn't even know and there was some questions about that, I think, a few years back, and one of the designers had looked into it and wasn't sure. There's like you said, back in Pandaria.
Yeah, it was a long time ago.
Yeah, so and people, whoever put it in, I don't think is with us anymore, and so whatever that original intent was, whether it was a tribute to someone's.
Oh shit. Whoever put it in, I don't think is with us anymore. So in other words, it's one of those, one of the bad boys of Blizzard that put this in there. And maybe Blizzard is trying to figure out what to do with it now. Because they obviously had some weird story plan for this Red Dragon. I don't know. It's just interesting that he uses that. Whoever put that in there is likely not with us anymore.
child or a friend or an employee. Some of those things get kind of lost in the mists of time. So I can't tell you what the original intent was for it, other than a cool little thing that you would come across in the world.
Yeah.
And so
kind of like the Iron Forge Airport thing.
Yeah, and some of those are just meant to be fun. Somebody had some extra time, they threw a thing in.
Fun little things in the world.
Yeah, that sort of thing. So that's not to say that we won't come up with a bigger purpose for our friend Andre, but maybe it will be, and it really comes down to, does somebody have a cool idea for it or pitch or something like that, and who knows, maybe some team member who catches this interview and hears about it is like, oh, that's right, I had an idea about that dragon, and maybe something cool will happen, but we'll see. Okay,
yeah, if anything, that's a good enough confirmation. So let's go to the next one. Where exactly is Reno Jackson and Rafam? Because they were both seen in Mechagon and Uldum, and they're both very heavily tied towards Galakrond's lore and Hearthstone. And I think we even saw them in like some data mine stuff. So are there going to be anything with Reno or Rafam?
Well, what I'd say is that remember that Hearthstone lore is not canon. Yeah, it's its own continuity in that regard. But we do like making references to those characters, and Mechagon was one of those places where it just felt really right to do that. It was fun. Mechagon was, apart from the whole, we're going to turn you into robots and blow up stuff. It was pretty lighthearted in terms of its tone, and had a lot of opportunities for using some of those Hearthstone characters. But just because they appeared there doesn't mean that we inherited all of that Hearthstone continuity and bring it in. So when you see our Reno Jackson, that doesn't mean he has the same dragon origin or something. Yeah. He can be just what he appears to be, a fun, adventurous human who does stuff. So
he would always be a dragon.
No, that we can kind of pick and choose what pieces of that. But we deliberately didn't want
I want to ask you guys that question, because I've never had a problem with it, but maybe some people do. Do you mind the fact that Hearthstone is so divorced from World of Warcraft? Like, do you sometimes wish that the lore in Hearthstone and World of Warcraft was more closely related to one another? Or is it fine? Because for me, it's always been fine. I think it provides a lot more freedom to both. So Hearthstone can tell crazy, wacky stories without really interfering with World of Warcraft story. And also, as someone that doesn't play Hearthstone, for me, it's sort of... I don't want to start playing Hearthstone just so that I can know the lore of World of Warcraft. So just in that, I don't want to play Hearthstone. And if they started making the lore closely related to one another, now I have to start playing Hearthstone so that I can know what the hell the story of World of Warcraft is. But yeah, let me know. What do you guys think of that?
For Dragonflight, that wasn't a thing that we wanted to pull into the story and make a part of the thing. And, we always have to think of, when we do pull in characters like that, what attachments are they bringing in? What expectations from the audience are they bringing in? And so we want to be careful not to... what might be just a fun offhanded thing to throw in, it might cause, it might mislead someone to think there's bigger implications, or they might, say, well, if that part is true, then what about this other thing from Hearthstone, and is that true or not? It might end up being more confusing than helpful. Mm-hmm. So we're just mindful of things like that when we pull in characters. Yeah, it's great fun.
Yeah,
it's
fun,
awesome to see this stuff they do.
Yeah, they just kind of throw stuff at the wall. Okay. So that's good. That's good to know. I just assumed that was the case too. Let's go on to this next one. So we have part of the Infinite Dragon storyline where you go back in time. You go back to the Black Empire, and N'Zoth seems to recognize players while you're there. And there's been these theories going around the community about people who haven't purged the Eye of N'Zoth from BFA. Are there going to be any repercussions with that? Was that a hint at something to come in the future?
Well, N'Zoth devotees are really attached to their Eye of N'Zoth. Yeah. I know people get really... and I'm not saying we never do something with it. But I also don't want people to think that every little thing that we do is adding up to that necessarily. But it is very interesting. And again, we're very deliberate about what N'Zoth says when you go back there, what lines we chose.
The players are going to love to hear that.
Yeah, and I actually wrote the new lines for N'Zoth that we put in because I wanted some very specific things in there. And that doesn't mean, again, as you've seen with Il'gynoth lines, with things N'Zoth said in the past and stuff like that. Not always. Like some of them are deliberately, to make you think, or, some of them are not going to lead to something. But again, that's part of the Void's perspective is infinite possibilities. Which of these is true? Are all of them true? Are none of them true? Or some?
This is why I have always approached all whispers from the old gods as true. And this is why I've had these disagreements with other lore content creators when they pick and choose what is true and what isn't based on the theories that they have. My reasoning have always been, it's not lies. The Void never lies. Everything they tell you is true. It doesn't mean that everything they tell you is canon. Okay? If that makes sense. Hopefully it does. Everything is true, but not everything is canon.
Some of them true. All of that stuff is part of the nature of characters who are of the Void, and certainly N'Zoth too. But it is again, it's interesting because N'Zoth does recognize you way in the past when he shouldn't, and yet, what does that mean if you then, did that actually happen? And then when we saw N'Zoth in Battle for Azeroth, did he have that knowledge and that memory, or is this
that's the main theory? Is like
all of that stuff is interesting to think about, isn't it? And again, it's worth looking back at some of the things N'Zoth and his minions have said in the past and what they've hinted at and so forth. And it's certainly fun to put all that stuff together, and you end up with that kind of the classic Charlie meme of the lines on the board connecting to everything. I think that's a lot of fun, and it seems like there's a lot of people who have fun with that stuff. So we'll see.
Yeah, because like the main theory of that is like, since you went back in time and he recognized you, he knows which timeline is going to happen, so we can better prepare for what's going to happen. Would you say that's accurate?
I would say that N'Zoth was very clever, and there was much written in Chronicle and things that that have been said about how N'Zoth was the weakest and of the old gods and all that. And what does that mean? What does that mean? Does that mean his army was the weakest? Does that mean his physical form was the weakest? Certainly not his mind wasn't the weakest out of all of them, because he has shown that he is very smart. And
Xal'atath even says it. I've been saying this for so long, bro. God, people need to start listening to me, man. I've been saying this for so long. Because he was the weakest, he became the smartest. Y'Shaarj, for example, his only focus was on strength, on the ability to basically overpower his enemies. The same with Yogg-Saron, and pretty much the same with Cthulhu. While N'Zoth played the long game, like constantly playing the long game. Even Xal'atath says this. She tells you, this is where the god of the deep lost a great battle to the god with 7 heads. In other words, N'Zoth v. Y'Shaarj. But as so often was the case, even in defeat, the god of the deep ultimately won. See, that right there speaks to master strategist. All of his actions, all of the outcomes play towards his strength, toward what he ultimately wants. So the fact that we managed to defeat him in BFA was by his own design. He needed us to defeat him. For what purpose, I do not know, but that I stand by that.
Responsible for so much of Warcraft lore.
Yeah, and if he is that smart, and that long thinking, and if he got some possibilities tipped to him via our messing around with time, well, that's interesting to think about, and what.
Oh shit! That breaks your brain. Oh shit! Oh. Remember, time is fluid. The future exists right now. We haven't seen the future yet, but the future does exist right now. In other words, when we fought N'Zoth in BFA, N'Zoth already knew what we had done, because in Dragonflight, we traveled back in time to the days of the Black Empire, and this allowed for N'Zoth already in the past to see how the future would play out. And so N'Zoth knew in BFA already what we had done, because in Dragonflight we had traveled before BFA in order to inform him of the outcome. Shit. Oh, okay. Okay.
That could mean.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, let's go on to this next one.
Okay, this is actually bigger than you think. This is how N'Zoth managed to know what to do and how to do it. This is where Xal'atath's Whisper comes from. Xal'atath's Whisper says that even in defeat, the God of the Deep ultimately won. When we went back in time to the early days of the Black Empire, N'Zoth saw everything. From the death of Yisaraj, how we would defeat Yogg-Saron, how we would defeat K'Fun, how we would defeat him, what the Titans would do, what Azeroth would look like, where Azeroth would be in the life cycle of things, Magni. N'Zoth saw everything. Because not only does he know us, he knows what we have done. So N'Zoth would have seen everything in that moment, everything that we knew, he would have known at that moment. Now, we can argue about what actually did we know, because as players, we obviously know a lot. We've read the Chronicles. But do our characters know the events of the Chronicles? Is this information that is privy to... Are our characters privy to this information? Or is this information that only the player have, and our characters would still be mostly like ignorant of this information?
So we have the Ethereals working in the background in the adventure journals, the Brawlers Guild, the Transmog competition, and they're all doing various things. And in Dragonflight, we're finding these random odd coins in our adventure guide from the Ethereals as well. Is this all leading up to something with ethereal lore, possibly?
Well, we like the Ethereals. They're super fun. They've been fun since they were first introduced.
Yeah,
and we do tend to use them a lot, both for story stuff, but also they fit well with some of that systemic things. Void storage, they were the ideal fit for transmogrification. There's some cool stuff there.
Yeah.
And so what I would say is that the Ethereals are very keen to keep their fingers in the cookie jar, as it were. Like, they want to, they have a knack for kind of hanging around and looking for opportunities. And after all, they're touched by, powers of the void and the nether and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And so there is a certain chaoticness to them, and a certain fun and unpredictability to them. And we certainly haven't seen the last of the Ethereals. But again, when the time is right, we will be seeing some fun, cool stuff with them. Maybe some perspectives we haven't seen before on the Ethereals.
Oh, interesting. Okay, well, that's fair enough. Let's go on to this next one over here. So, might we see story elements in the future that players get to decide the outcome of? Say, with the Sibelian and Wrathion thing, are players actually going to be able to choose the leadership? And if so, is that something you guys are experimenting with or will experiment with going down the line?
The Sibelian and Wrathion stuff is meant to be flavor and what you like for your character, who you want to support. So it's not meant to be a vote. It's not, I think that would be a little bit unfair
It would be a
to
mess.
position it as a fun flavor thing, and then later say, "Oh, actually, you were voting the whole time," and then people go, "Wait,
Yeah.
wait! I didn't know that. I didn't think I was making." So that's
like assuming it was like a vote though, or like if there's gonna be one in the future. Was
If
this
we
like
stage it like
a testing the waters to see maybe we can do this in the future?
no, it wasn't. That wasn't the intent behind it. It wasn't.
Oh.
But I'm not saying we would never do something like that.
Yeah,
I
think
it
want
would
to throw anything off the table for
no.
sure.
Um,
But it wasn't the intent with this.
It wasn't the intent with this, no. But
Okay, yeah, that makes
could
sense.
something like that be done in the future under the right circumstances? It could be fun.
The only way I can see Blizzard putting players in charge of overall storytelling, like what the outcome of a story would be sort of behind the scenes, off the veil. So, in other words, take the Rathian Sibelian thing. Players are obviously just playing and having fun, sort of leveling up with both Sibelian and Rathian. Now, Blizzard could look at this and say, let's say in the future, Blizzard designed another storyline like this, only in this storyline, it's far more like the Scryers and the Aldor back from TBC, where if you make one choice, you can't make the other choice. Now, what Blizzard can do there is sort of behind the scenes look, okay, how many people made this choice versus how many people made that choice? And then based on that decision-making process, so how many people chose one over the other, Blizzard can then say, okay, so we're going to choose this one as the outcome since most people seem to have favored this side of it instead of this side to it. So more behind the scenes. I don't think... Like, it would be a mess if you put players in charge of choosing the leader. Because even if it's based on a vote system, so in other words, you go to, Rathian and you cast your vote for Rathian, and then a week later Blizzard decides, what do you do now with all the players that voted for Sibelian? Because they're super unhappy that their story is now playing out with Rathian being the leader, but they wanted Sibelian as the leader. Unless, of course, you want to make that into a new story where now Sibelian is launching some kind of counteroffensive and he's staging a rebellion, and all the players that voted for Sibelian can now join in this rebellion and sort of become renegades, if you will. So you could do something like that, but even that will just... It'll become messy very fast. I don't think you can put players in charge of choices in an MMO unless it's very personalized choices. That's the only thing I think you can put players in charge of.
Fun and cool, and that's what it has to be. Like, whenever the danger is always, people when gaming the system or deliberately trying to wreck the outcome for other people and things like that.
Yeah.
So you need to always be really careful when you in a multiplayer game, which WoW will always be. That's that's the core of what it is.
Yeah.
The repercussions of, well, somebody, I wanted this choice, but a bunch of other people outruled me, and now that's not fun for me. Whereas in a single player game, it's great to be able to make choices because that then you get to see the repercussions of things that you wanted to see, and it works really well for that. So it would have to be a situation where it felt good and it felt like, no matter what the outcome, it's interesting and has cool, and nobody's going to get too bent out of shape if their way isn't the thing that ends up coming, being the eventual outcome. So it's a tricky situation, but again, I'm not ruling it out, but it wasn't the intent here.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah, when I first read on this question, I thought the exact same thing. It's like, people are just going to find a way to game the system anyway, because WoW is so min-maxing. So
True.
Let's go on to the final one. It's more of a flavor one. From a lore perspective, if you had a choice, which Dragonflight would you join? Or at least which one is your favorite?
Well, that is a very tough question for me in particular, because I live so closely with all of these flights. So what I would say is I'll give two answers to it, because on an intellectual level, the bronze, the guy behind me, is very compelling because time is cool.
Yeah, I love the bronze Dragonflight.
Yeah, and especially when you start getting into those possibilities.
I would say on an intellectual level, I would far more lean into the blue. The blue Dragonflight is fundamentally the most intelligent of all of the Dragonflights. They favor knowledge over all other things. So from an intellectual standpoint, I would 100% favor the blue Dragonflight. Malygos, Sindragosa, Caligos, those guys. From a heart perspective, it's the black all the way. I think the black Dragonflight has just one of those like tragic enough backstories where it just makes them really cool.
Abilities and potential outcomes and, you know, potential disturbances with the time stream. It's a lot of fun. And so like that's my favorite from like that sort of flavor. But I also have a lot of fondness for the black Dragonflight in terms of like,
yeah, that's my favorite.
Not when there's, you know, not necessarily when, you know, when Deathwing took over and then drove them all into kind of a dark place. But
that's
if you go back
stuff.
to the origins of the flight and what they represent, the Earth Warder,
yeah, like what we
protectors.
saw in those like preview videos.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's something really cool and noble and strong about that appeals to me, and that kind of like adventurous, like, yeah, we can take this stuff on and we'll be the protectors of this place. So that's my other real favorite.
Yeah, I just like the black Dragonflight because Wrathion's just my favorite character.
Well, yes, it's definitely hard not to love Wrathion. At least we try to make it that way.
He's great. He's never been dull. That's for sure.
I think that would be the biggest insult that you could ever say to Wrathion was calling him dull. I think he can survive being called dangerous or, you know, a potential you know, falling into old god stuff. But if you call him dull, he's not going to like that at all.
Oh, there's no way. Okay. All right. So that's all the time we have for now. Thank you for answering all those questions. I'm surprised we actually got through all of them.
Well, it was a lot of fun, and I appreciate the excellent questions, and look forward to talking to you again.
Of course. Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, I liked it. It was a very good interview. I would still say that as far as interviews go, I still prefer Noble's interview that he did with Steve Danuser, but mainly because Noble pushed back a lot more, and I think we got a lot more insights into... This is again why I don't like the half-an-hour format, because how can you push back? Like, Hiru also tried to push back a little. At the end of the day, you only have half an hour. You have 8, 9, 10 questions that you want to get through. How do you ask all of that, plus then push back on answers that you don't necessarily like? Not necessarily dislike because you hate the answer, but more just because the answer isn't necessarily revealing what you asked, or whatever the case may be. But yeah, at the end of the day, I think still very cool interview. A lot of insight into future lore stuff, which is super cool. Some confirmation on some of the theories that we had, some changes to some of the theories that we had. So definitely very cool to have watched. I hope you guys enjoyed it.